Yeah, my name's Laiken, like Paula introduced. I am lucky enough to work at the Center for Biological Diversity based in Tucson. Our entire mission is saving life on Earth. Sounds simple, right? um, we primarily do that through a lot of litigation. We file a ton of lawsuits to try and protect endangered species, and the single biggest tool we have for that is through the Endangered Species Act. So we want to do everything we can to preserve the Endangered Species Act. It's faced some unprecedented attacks this year from Congress to try and gut the act and impede our ability to use it to protect endangered species. But that's really the core of our mission. We also do a lot of work with science. We have a lot of scientist staff who do a lot of great research and studies and can help support our litigation. And we do creative media. And then we have people like me who kind of fall in between all of that. I'm a campaigner, so I get to work with the lawyers, with the scientists, with our media teams, and it really is a fantastic job. So we are a national organization. We have offices all over the US, and we have one satellite office in Mexico. And we primarily focus on work in the US, but we also do work related to wildlife trade around the country. So I do have some slides. I'm going to share my screen and get started. Let me know if things don't look as they should, please.
Let me interrupt and ask, just check on one thing. Do you want questions as they come up, or do you want to save them to the end?
Let's save them to the end. Okay. I plan to have plenty of time for discussions. Yeah, I think that'll just keep the flow going a little bit better.
Okay, and people can always put questions in the chat. We'll make sure to catch them later as well.
Definitely. And also, I'm more than happy to talk to individuals afterwards. My email's on the presentation. I want to be in touch with anyone who's interested. So,
right.
Thanks, Paolo. So, I always think it's important to start a presentation with a stunning nature photo. It helps remind us what we care about. At least it does for me. Helps remind me of why I give a damn. Especially for the desert. I think a lot of our families, a lot of our friends who don't live here don't realize just how spectacularly lush, verdant, and biodiverse this place is. I'm so inspired by this landscape because all it takes is one rainfall and the whole place just transforms. I've never been anywhere like this. And it cast a spell on me, it sunk its claws into me, and now I fully expect to live here forever. The Sonoran Desert is also one of the wettest deserts. It's the wettest desert in North America, which increases the levels of biodiversity here. All sorts of incredible critters that are able to thrive here because of the relative moisture that we do receive here in the Sonoran Desert. It's a really special place where we have plants like the organ pipe cactus, the Sanita cactus that don't live anywhere else in the US that actually reach the northern extent of their range, as well as all these species like the black bear who are reaching the southern extent of their range. So it's this overlap of ecotones, and that's where we're all lucky enough to live. I think, excuse me, this map really helps folks understand what's happening here. We really do live in the borderlands, and I'm not talking about this political linear boundary. I'm talking about these borders of all of these different ecosystems, all of these different influences that coalesce right around Tucson and the Sky Island area to really just produce pure joy for us who are living here. We get to see mountain slopes that have jaguars and black bears roaming on the same hillsides. We have ocelots, we have elegant trogons, we have the most incredible wildlife, and also the highest levels of biodiversity in the United States. So this really is a special place. And I just want to impress that upon everyone who is lucky enough to live here. We also have a huge number of endangered species that live along the US-Mexico border. The center where I work did a study looking at 93 different threatened and endangered species that live along the border region. And all of those species have been or would be further imperiled by border wall construction. These are animals like the Sonoran pronghorn, like the jaguar, but also animals you wouldn't think that much about like these species of endemic fish that just live in the southeastern corner of Arizona called the yaqui chub and the yaqui top minnow that have been imperiled by wall construction right along the boundary. A little bit about my history. Out of college, I got what I would still consider a total dream job at Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument. These are pictures just along the border at Oregon Pipe. And my job was to assess the biggest threats facing the wilderness there that would help in park planning. And I was really shocked to find this was well before border wall construction, by the way, in 2017. So Trump had just taken office, but the wall wasn't being built. I was really shocked to find that the biggest single threat to this wilderness area was Border Patrol activity. We documented almost 17,000 miles driven off-road by Border Patrol agents through this wilderness area, which would normally be illegal. If you or I drove our vehicles in wilderness, we could be arrested for that. But because it was a national security issue, and that's what they claimed, they were able to drive thousands and thousands of miles off-road in wilderness through habitat for the endangered Sonoran pronghorn, which does not respond well to vehicle noise or habitat fragmentation. So working at Oregon Pipe really opened my eyes up to the complexities that we're facing in the borderlands, and made me want to do more work looking at policy solutions that were able to look head on at, hey, why are we allowing these border security operations to trash our wilderness areas? And is this really the best way to manage for these areas? This is what the border looked like when I worked at Oregon Pipe in 2017. As you can see, these little posts with a railroad tie welded to them, they're called vehicle barriers. And the vast majority of the Oregon Pipe border was made up of these barriers. These barriers were actually really successful and important at stopping vehicles from driving into wilderness. Before they were installed, smugglers would often lead Border Patrol on car chases throughout the wilderness, which was terrible for the wilderness area. But these vehicle barriers effectively stopped all vehicle incursions into Oregon Pipe, which meant that it was just Border Patrol who was now driving around in wilderness. These vehicle barriers are permeable to wildlife. Most wildlife could go under or over these barriers. And overall, they were effectively doing their job and working. If you go to Oregon Pipe now, this is what you will see in the exact same location. So there's a massive, impassable 30-foot concrete and steel wall with a 10-foot deep footer that's been built across this entire landscape. And I took this photo before they had finished walling off Monument Hill. So this wall goes all the way over the hill. There's a huge impact zone throughout here where they blasted. And this is the site that, if you've read about it in the news, there are indigenous burial grounds on this hillside from the Tohono O'odham and the Apache nations. So just an immense tragedy what has happened here. And of course, if you're an animal, if you're any bigger than a jackrabbit, you're not going to fit through these bollards. So this cuts off migrations of pronghorn, of javelina, of bobcats, of mule deer, of kit foxes. Anything larger than a small rabbit is not getting through this barrier. And that means that the gene pools are going to shrink. Animals are not going to be able to cross as they've done for millennia. And also when there's severe drought, there's going to be less landscape forage to look for, whether that's food or water. So severe impacts for wildlife, and of course, horrific impacts to indigenous grave sites. As a part of this wall construction, the Trump administration bulldozed and chopped apart what we estimate to be about likely thousands of saguaro cactuses. I went out here every week to document the destruction. Every week I found new cactuses that have been bulldozed. I think all of us live in Arizona. We understand that these cactuses are iconic and extremely special. But to our friends who are Tohono O'odham, these truly are sacred. They're viewed as entities that constitute their ancestors. So I went out here with some of my O'odham friends, and while it hurts to see for me, I can't imagine how it felt for them. We also saw the destruction of hundreds of organ pipe cactuses. This is the exact species that the park was formed to protect. So we're destroying everything this place was designated to protect, just to make way for this border wall structure. I also think it's crucial to have a geographic understanding of the areas that we're working to protect. So this little green square here, this is organ pipe. That's about 33 miles of border with Sonora. And if you ever go to Rocky Point, you cross through Organ Pipe. It's when it gets really, really beautiful, and you probably want to go for a hike. If folks haven't spent time there, I'd highly recommend they go. Just to the west of Organ Pipe is the Cabeza Prieta Wildlife Refuge, which dwarfs Organ Pipe in size. This is the heart of the endangered Sonoran pronghorn population, in an area that we're very invested in protecting. And then if you keep going west, it's the Barry M. Goldwater bombing range. And while they still do run some bombing drills and there is active unexploded ordnance littering the ground there, it still is an undeveloped area, and they also manage it for the pronghorn, for other wildlife. It can be considered maybe a lower level of conservation lands, far better than it being developed. Just across the border is the Pinacate Biosphere Reserve. This is about as large as all three of these monuments, has about that much border as all three of these combined. And it is a sweeping, beautiful desert landscape, home to other endemic species, and more Sonoran pronghorn down here. So historically, the pronghorn herd has roamed from Organ Pipe through Cabeza into the Pinacate, and then back again, largely migrating to follow availability of food and forage. This wall has cut off everything from this end of the Tohono O'odham Nation all the way to Yuma, with a few tiny gaps in really, really rugged mountainous terrain. So that means the entire border, this entire region that once constituted the heart of the largest protected Sonoran desert landscape, has been cleaved in two by this monstrosity. And that's a travesty. That's really hard to take. I'll talk a little bit more later about the solutions we're looking at and some of our efforts to open up wildlife crossings and actually tear down the most damaging sections of wall. But I think it's crucial for folks to understand that this map, I mean, this is basically the western half of Arizona, and it has been entirely walled off. And that also takes place along the most important conservation lands that we have in the Arizona deserts. So I love this picture. This is a little baby puma climbing under the vehicle barrier. I think it beautifully illustrates how, while these barriers might not be great, they do allow for wildlife to cross, and are far preferable to a border wall. This is a recent video actually, that Sky Island Alliance, one of our partner organizations, took. They have thousands of cameras along the border that document wildlife. You can tell these deer become confused, disoriented when they reach the wall. They just keep trucking on their way. In places where the wall goes on for, dozens and dozens of miles, they'll be hard pressed to find a passageway. That said, there are plenty of gates open along the wall, but some of those are actually too small for animals like Coues deer and white-tailed deer. This was a really sad picture that my contacts at Organ Pipe sent to me of mule deer that was taken in August of 2020. I don't know if you remember, but that was like the worst monsoon we ever experienced. It was the mountain was on fire, the pandemic was going on, and we didn't get a drop of rain. This deer was likely wandering south to the Rio Sonoita watershed, just across the border in Mexico, to look for water because it was so famished. It's a migration it and its ancestors had been making for millennia, but this year, for the first time, there was a border wall on its way, and it perished against the wall. So I kind of wanted to show you another really special habitat home to endangered species at Organ Pipe, and I figured the best way would be to self-indulgently show you this video that I'm featured in about it.
Sound is not coming through.
Thanks for telling me. That must be an error on the screen sharing part. I won't narrate this video for all of you then, but effectively I'll skip to this section, which shows Quito Baquito Spring, which is this miraculous desert oasis that comes up. This spring system somehow bubbles out of these granite mountains, and it gives life to all of this water in the desert. There's not another spring system like this anywhere in this region. And it's stunning. And it's also home to 2 endangered species, the Quito Baquito pupfish and the Sonoyta mud turtle, that don't live anywhere else in the world. So their entire existence depends on this spring continuing to flow. And while they were building the border wall builders actually were drilling new wells, sucking up groundwater in order to mix concrete for the wall. They're likely, I think the permit was for 84,000 gallons of groundwater a day. And there is not a lot of water flowing out of this spring. So we were extremely concerned. We did see some diminished spring flow to Quito Baquito. And we were in a position where we really were concerned that the spring would dry up. And this endangered pupfish and endangered turtle could have been the first casualties of Trump's wall. Thankfully, the spring continued to flow, but they did ultimately finish the wall right along the edge of the spring. And that means that habitat is cut off from all wildlife south of the border. Animals who would come up to the spring to drink, including mountain lions, which we know have been documented doing exactly that. Apologies that the sound did not work. This is what it looks like today. 30-foot wall right at the southern edge of the spring. There are stadium lights on the north side of that wall. There was another Tanatham grave site in this area that was plowed over. Hundreds of artifacts were destroyed. And that's because we couldn't get cultural monitors out to the site fast enough before the wall went up. But this is how close the endangered species are to border wall construction. And we are closely monitoring Quito Baquito. We desperately want to protect the pupfish and the turtle. And we actually got some really good news this morning that the Fish and Wildlife Service was proposing to designate a 3rd species, this little tiny microscopic spring snail that only lives at Quito Baquito, nowhere else in the world, as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. So that's a good thing, and that'll add another layer of protection to the spring and to the snail itself. But because all of these laws were waived, the Endangered Species Act and many others, to build the wall, there's still only so much that kind of protection can do in the face of future attempts to build more walls. Moving a little further east in Arizona, we have incredible diversity of wildlife. This is coming into the Sky Islands from the desert habitat. This footage was captured by my colleague Russ McSpadden. This is a camera trap he put out in the Chiricahuas. And he came back and plugged the SD card into his computer, and there was a jaguar on it, which is wild because some people spend years and years and years trying to capture these elusive cats. He also had a black bear. This is all the same camera at the same site in a matter of weeks. Beautiful buck, mountain lions. That's a quaddy. And this beautiful little bear cub. So that's just some of the diversity that we see in the borderlands. That is specifically in the Chiricahua Mountains. So these purple arrows all represent the last best jaguar corridors going from Sonora, Mexico, where there is a large breeding population of jaguars, coming back into Arizona, which all of Arizona, south of the Grand Canyon, and basically east of the West Desert, is jaguar country. There are historical jaguar records throughout Arizona, including at the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The last female jaguar was killed at an elevation of about 10,000 feet in the White Mountains. So they're extremely adaptable cats. And these red dots represent all the areas the Trump administration was planning on walling off as they were finishing up their term during the lame duck. That effectively, they would have walled off every remaining jaguar corridor in Arizona. And all these little paw prints are jaguar detections. So these are detections in the US, these are detections in Mexico. We know they're here, we know they're coming back. We have at least one resident jaguar in the Chiricahuas, and we may have more that we haven't detected yet. And important to understand that jaguars are really important for the ecosystem. Large predators like them actually contribute to a healthy ecosystem, a healthy, sustainable prey base. Thankfully, the Trump administration was not able to close all of these gaps. So this is a map of where the current border walls start and end. These red lines are all border walls. So we still have a huge opening in the Tohono O'odham Nation, because not even Trump was going to try and wall off the sovereign Indian nation. Small opening in the Babakibri Mountains, smallish opening in the Atascosa Highlands and Pajarito Mountains. And then this really great corridor here, which is the San Rafael Valley. And that feeds into the Santa Rita Mountains up here. And then most of this corridor has been incurred upon in Arizona, but there's still some good habitat into the Palencia and Chiricahua Mountains here. And this is really the most rugged, beautiful part of the Sierra Madre in Mexico. So there's a ton of protected land right here. We've documented jaguars here just in the last year. So we know they're here. We know they're trying to come up. We have to ensure that the border remains open and permeable for the cats so they can finally come home, because that's ultimately what we want to see. This is a picture we took of them bulldozing, just butchering this mountain in jaguar habitat in the Pajarito Mountains. So they did put up a border wall here, and this is in designated jaguar critical habitat. So they did encroach upon it. These are some of the areas that we were actually recommending they remove the wall to allow for permeability. But even when you remove the wall, I mean, you can't repair this kind of damage. This will outlast all of us. And it's hard to look at, but I think it's important that we understand. It's always relevant, I think, to discuss how the wall is not a solution even for its own stated goals. I took this picture of the wall cut open at Organ Pipe here. Small sections of wall you can walk down and count as many as a dozen cuts. This had a welded repair on it, and they date the repairs that they welded April 24th, 2023. I was there not even a week later, and it had already been cut back open. And interestingly, they left this little angle grinder right down here. And that's all that it takes to slice this wall in half. You know, $5 grinder blade you can buy at Home Depot. And we see this time and time and time again. Additionally, this is what happens to the wall when it floods. These gates were literally blown off their hinges. This is in southeastern Arizona. We were actually just south of the border here over the weekend, and the land managers south of the border in Mexico said they found 4 or 5 gates that were all buried in the stream that have since just been completely buried by sediment. So if Border Patrol forgets to open these gates, they will be blasted off their hinges. And there are gates every mile, sometimes half mile, all along the wall that have to be opened at least all summer to allow for monsoon floods. So I think most folks don't realize that if we build the wall across rugged terrain, we have to have gates that are open, that of course people, smugglers can use. So I think that kind of goes to show that the wall is not based in any sort of reality. It's political theater, it's a talking point, it's used for election campaigns, but it's not a realistic solution to what the situation at the border is. These are some other great pictures of walls being blown out by floods, all in Arizona. This is in Nogales. This is at Organ Pipe in 2008. This is at Organ Pipe in 2012. So we've had numerous occasions of border walls being blown out by flooding, because that's what happens when you try to build a wall across rugged desert terrain. There's also the problem of human ingenuity. People will always find a way. I think these guys in the Jeep did a pretty admirable job. They didn't make it this time, but I bet there were other times that they did. And rope ladders. I mean, you see rope ladders hanging from the wall, especially in California and Texas, but I've seen it in Arizona as well. It's so easy for someone to go throw up a rope ladder and then shimmy down the other side. Just again, the wall is not a realistic solution for immigration and smuggling. Even if your goal is to stop every single person crossing the border and to completely seal it off, the wall's not going to do that. So what now? We have been working with a large coalition of more than 70 groups, including groups like Sierra Club and also the Tohono Nation, to develop a document detailing the key areas we want to make sure stay unwalled. We want to make sure are not ever impeded upon, and devising ways to actually do that legislatively. We also are asking the Biden administration to remove certain sections of border wall, which of course that's what gets the headline. That's not all we were doing, but that's always what gets the headline. And most of those areas that we want to see the wall removed in are key wildlife corridors. They're riparian areas like the San Pedro River that have the gates open a lot of the time anyway, and other tribally significant areas like Quito Baquito Springs at Oregon Pipe. This is a probably rough and hard to read map of some of those locations, but I'm happy to share them with anybody who's interested. And the other main thing we're focused on with the wall is monitoring the situation with the stadium lighting. We surveyed a ton of the Arizona border this summer, counting the number of stadium lights that have been installed along these priority conservation areas. We counted almost 2,000 stadium lights that have been installed at Oregon Pipe, Cabeza Prieta, the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge, the San Pedro River, and other areas. So we mapped all of that out. Thankfully, none of these lights have been turned on yet. They're not electrified. I think Border Patrol has a bit of work they have to do before they make them operable. They have committed to us in writing that they will not turn them on until they go through the National Environmental Policy Act planning process, which means they'll factor in public input. They have to respond to that public input. They have to justify their actions. And if they don't do that right, we can sue them. I don't think that that commitment is worth the paper it's been typed upon. But, you know, we're in a tough situation. We have to work with them as much as we can. And then, of course, we have to show the world the damage if they do indeed turn these lights on. So I personally am most concerned about the lights impacting the pollinators of the Sonoran Desert. You know, saguaros, Oregon pipe, other cactuses, they're all nighttime pollinated plants. They're pollinated by bats. And if we blast all of this lighting into this huge swath of land, we're going to scare away the pollinators. And that means that this whole swath of land will lose its ability to be pollinated. We'll likely see its reproduction decline, and we'll watch the whole ecosystem just start to degrade in that area. So we will fight like hell to make sure that these lights stay off. And that's going to be a big campaign priority moving forward. The lights will also shine into lands in Mexico, a lot of which is undeveloped and really good habitat. So we're concerned about that too. And I think, you know, the situation with the pollination and the bats is a good point to reiterate that every single one of these species has a role. Every single one of these species has a job in this web of life that we all live in. When we lose even a single species and its function in the ecosystem, it's like we're pulling out another thread of that web of life. And it's only a matter until the whole thing unravels. So that's ultimately what we're trying to do at the center, is to make sure that that web sticks together and then that we can continue to benefit from it all and live in this beautiful world full of biodiversity. A couple other issues that we're working on. The center is also very invested in stopping large-scale destructive mining projects in Arizona. This is the Santa Rita Mountains, south of Tucson. Beautiful place, jaguar country. Site of the Rosemont mine, as a lot of you have probably read about, very familiar with. We won a great legal battle that stopped the giant open pit copper mine here. But nonetheless, Hudbay, this Canadian foreign mining company, is pushing ahead with their exploration activities. As you can see, they've started to cut into the mountain here, cut these massive switchbacks, and they are drilling, digging for copper. Copper is one of the most abundant minerals. It's found all over the country and all over the world. There's also a ton of it in our landfills. So the fact that we're destroying jaguar habitat, one of the most beautiful mountain ranges in Arizona, in one of the most biodiverse places in the country, I mean, this is the last place we should be building a giant new copper mine. This is a video of what Hudbay is doing now. they're effectively decapitating this ridgeline. This is all footage my colleague Russ McSpadden took. And most of this is on private land and on areas that they have mining leases on. We have a couple different legal battles going on around this, but based on how antiquated mining policy and mining law has been written, they're actually able to get away with this right now. We are going to continue to fight this every step of the way. But this is just a snapshot into what we're fighting, into why it's so important to stop these mining companies from destroying our natural heritage. Last thing I'll touch on that's really key to the work that we're doing at the center right now is protecting riparian areas, especially riparian areas home to endangered species, from grazing, from cows. This might not seem like as important of an issue or as sexy of an issue as the border wall or giant mine fights, but it's a huge issue facing the Southwest. There are thousands of miles of rivers that are home to endangered species that are very, very impacted by cattle. So this is an area in central Arizona I was able to visit a couple months ago, and this is what a wetland ecosystem is supposed to look like. This is all critical habitat for the New Mexico meadow jumping mouse, the adorable tiny little mouse that I definitely don't want to see go extinct. This is what most of their critical habitat looks like right now. It's been absolutely grazed down to dirt. Erosion is starting. Overall biodiversity loss is severe. I mean, you look back and forth at these pictures, there are probably hundreds of species encapsulated in this one picture, maybe thousands. I mean, there's so many insects, there's so many birds, all these microinvertebrates. And you go down to this and it's like, oh, that stream just exists for the cows. So we filed 7 different lawsuits over illegal grazing and the Forest Service's refusal to actually fence these riparian areas and stop that grazing, because water is life in Arizona, and we desperately need to protect these wetlands from overgrazing, and make sure that additional species aren't driven extinct by that. So I jumped around a lot on the last couple things, but I thought it was important to mention. Very happy to be here. That's it for my presentation, but I'm happy to discuss or take questions. Just excited to be here. Thanks, Paula.
Thanks, Laiken. We got a really incredible picture of a lot of what's south of us and so important. I'm just taking a look to see if what we have in the way of questions while I'm checking the chat. You mentioned the stadium lights, which I saw probably 15 years ago when they were just starting to put some up, and it was a shock to sort of come over a hill on the road and everything lit up. Besides the bats, are there other species that are impacted by this, what would happen if they did turn on those stadium lights?
Yeah, great question. Definitely. Short answer is there are tons. And we write about them in that report, A Wall of Lights in the Wild, which anyone can Google and download. I think, the most significant ones that are affected are endangered species like the ocelot, species like bobcats and mountain lions who hunt at night, who have evolved to use darkness to their advantage. So there are tons of predators. Predator-prey relationships are just completely messed up when there's artificial lighting at night. There are also a lot of research studies about the impacts of stadium lighting on aquatic species. The reflection of those lights on aquatic habitat permeates the water. It confuses fish and other invertebrates that are in the water. And there are a lot of aquatic habitats along the border, believe it or not. And I think one that's also really important to mention is like us, like humans. There are so few places we can go and look at dark night skies and have our minds blown and have the sense of perspective instilled in us while, laying on a sleeping bag out in the woods. And Oregon Pipe specifically is one of the darkest places I've ever been. It's been pursuing its designation as one of the international dark sky parks. And if these lights go on, I mean, it's game over. Yeah.
So kind of following up on that, Beryl asks, will or can the Dark Skies people, the organization that focuses on that, help in the fight against the lights?
Yeah, so they have, and I think they will continue to. The International Dark Sky Association is a very apolitical organization, but there are some issues like this that are so significant that they do have to take a clear stance. So we worked with them on the report that we did. They actually signed a letter that we wrote to the land managers and to Border Patrol, alerting of them of this issue. And yeah, they're involved.
Great. Okay. Maury has his hand up. If you unmute, Maury, you can ask your question.
Okay, thanks, Laiken, for this excellent presentation. I wanted to ask about Democrats talk a lot about securing the border using technology. Do you know what plans there are or what the effect of that technology and actually the existing like surveillance towers, fixed towers on people and wildlife?
Yeah, great question, Mohi. So there already is a very extensive network of surveillance along the border. Working at Oregon Pipe, I mean, I couldn't go take a pee when I was out in the field without feeling like I was being watched. And that was just a reality. I mean, there are towers everywhere. There is a robust network of existing towers, and some of that does have an impact. I think, you know, people point to more technology as a solution. We already have a ton of it out there. We've thrown so much money at it. I don't see that as a solution. I think there are dire human rights implications too, especially when it comes to the Tohono O'odham Nation. In many ways, we have put up tons of surveillance towers on a sovereign indigenous nation, oftentimes against the will of the people that live there. And a lot of our border security activity on the nation has been seen as some degree of an occupying force. I mean, it's a really complex question. The other thing that I'll add is like all of the stuff you see on the news that's drumming up all of the energy and fear. The people that we're seeing on the news, they're asylum seekers. There are people coming from other countries requesting asylum, which is a right under our laws. It's written that way. So adding technology isn't going to do anything to stop them, just like a border wall isn't going to do anything to stop them. So I think we do need to be careful to advocate for additional technology when we already have very robust networks in place that are oftentimes causing harm. But yeah, that's my personal take.
And the technology was one of the ways they were monitoring the border before the border wall. So maybe the visibility of the wall made them feel like they were doing something instead of, sorry, I couldn't get into that. But
no, I agree with that. Exactly.
Okay. Laurel, you want to take your question? Laurel? Okay. Unmute if you
Sorry,
unmute.
I just realized I was on mute while I was talking. Sorry about that. I'm wondering if you managed to get them to take down some of this border wall, there's still going to be just sort of catastrophic environmental damage from where it was built and all the trash they're bound to leave behind and so on. Is there like a legal avenue for suing the federal government into paying to try to mitigate the amount of damage that they've done to it?
Yeah, great question, Laurel. Such a good question that it has already happened. Yeah, so very big settlement was just reached between Sierra Club, ACLU, Southern Border Communities Coalition, a number of groups that we work really closely with, and the federal government. And that settlement did actually win some concessions for wildlife, including opening up a number of wildlife crossings. They were very, very small, a lot smaller than what we would actually call like a win. But there are some concessions, which is amazing because like for many years there was just no possible way to dream about getting concessions like that. As a part of that settlement, we also won, I believe it was $55 million for remediation. So that's a formidable amount of money. I mean, it's nothing compared to the 18 billion it took to build the wall, but it's more than like we're used to getting for meager projects to restore land on the border. So it's a start, and that is going to go into a ton of earthwork and erosion control to try and stabilize some of those areas that were blasted. We also believe that they need to set aside money as reparations to the Tohono O'odham Nation for the sites that they blasted. I mean, not that any of that is quantifiable. There's not enough money in the world that could repay you for destroying the graves of your ancestors. But we need to start somewhere, and that settlement did not do that. So we're looking at other options. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Okay, if you have any other questions or comments or concerns, you can put your hand up or put it in the chat. Susan said, your presentation actually made my heart hurt. I think I can well understand how she's feeling. I've been aware of these issues through reading, listening to your presentation, and seeing your slides. It was so powerful. Thank you so much for the difficult work you do. It really, I think we don't quite understand unless we go down there and really see what's going on or see presentations like this with the slides. It's really quite amazing. You mentioned any number of times the great extent of the biodiversity, and that this is one of the most biodiverse regions in the country. Any numbers, any sense of numbers of flora or fauna?
I don't have those numbers offhand. I mean, you can feel it when you're out there, and I know it's true. I can follow up with that though. We do definitely have quantifiable metrics, which we use.
I think it's amazing that so many of the important species that are really threatened by all of what's going on down on the borderlands are often very small. Insect life, pupfish, jumping mouse, and maybe seeing the large cats, the beauty of those animals can also help to raise people's awareness of and concern. Dan, I think.
Yep. Yeah, I'm just going to ask a question. Actually, I did get it in the chat, but I think you missed it. So, Laiken, thank you again for a really great presentation. It is really powerful, and especially as others have mentioned, being able to see the video and see the pictures just brings it home. I mean, I've seen a lot of those, especially with the concerns with the springs that were being essentially drained, and there's a lot of concern they're going to be drained completely. Thankfully, they weren't. But there is a very timely question I have, of course, with the very inaptly named Freedom Caucus threatening to shut down the government unless something is done to build more border wall. What is, if that happens, if they get more border wall funding forced into the budget, what can you do then?
Yeah, great question. We've been through these fights before. There have been any number of times where the GOP has threatened to shut down the government or shut down the government over wall funding. They have not all ended the same way. That has, in some cases, resulted in additional wall funding being granted. this is a different situation where we have Biden as president. I'm not holding my breath that he would actually call the bluff and shut down the government over this. But also it's important to remember that the Senate is still democratically controlled. So we're not in a situation where we have a president of one party and a Congress of two unified, or one unified party. So that makes the situation very different. Basically, the House and the Senate have to go into conference and agree on very, very different priorities before that bill is sent to the president. So I don't want to fully downplay the threat of more funding being shoved into a bill and Biden have to decide if he wants to sign it or shut down the government. I don't think he has that much of a backbone to where he'd actually stick up for us here, but he did, he did stop wall construction on day one, which is more than a lot of people thought he would do. And I think that's in no small part to the fact that Arizona helped give him the election. So I guess I'm thinking out loud. I think I could go a number of different ways. But we have our government affairs folks and a lot of very capable people from our respective organizations working Capitol Hill, trying to explain a lot of what I presented on tonight to legislators, to try and peel off the people who might be like just a little bit like open to yet again selling off the borderlands to keep the government running. So we'll see. If there is a big vote on this, the center and other groups will be sending out action alerts to try and get individuals, constituents to make phone calls, send emails. So I just said in the chat, in terms of the question of how can you help, it's very basic and maybe not that satisfying, but you can join our mailing lists, and we do send out action alerts with concrete actions that you guys can take. Easy calls and emails. If folks want to get more involved in that, just email me. Maybe we can find a way to put you to work on a project that we're working on. But as a base level, yeah, join our mailing lists. And if anyone is still on that godforsaken website that used to be Twitter, I still post every day about actions that folks can take and what we're working on.
Yeah, sorry to hear that. I did leave what is now X, but I guess I'm glad you're still fighting the good fight. I gave up.
It's probably, I think it's always important that our elected officials hear our voices and hear our concerns, particularly if they're maybe a little less sympathetic. We expect them to be a little less sympathetic than some might be. So yeah, definitely sign up to get the action alerts from the center. You can email Jana, who also sends out a lot of action alerts on important environmental issues for Sustainable Tucson. If you are interested and not yet on her advocacy list, Jana, Jana at sustainabletucson.org, and she will add you to the advocacy list. And it's really good to see.
If Laiken wants to send any actions out to it, he can email me there, the complete action with all the details of how to do it.
Great. Let me just check what we have here. Okay. Are there any additional questions? And was your hand up or just? No.
I could ask a question.
Okay.
As the Center for Biological Diversity, can you sort of put a general ballpark idea about to what extent policy endangers biological diversity, and to what extent kind of normal apolitical culture and the way that humans inhabit the environment has that same effect, and how does that shape the way that CBD does its work?
Wow, well, more philosophical, but also practical question. I mean, the two are implicitly interconnected, right? I think individual attitudes do shape policy decisions. I think people's choices about how engaged to be in the political world clearly directly shapes policy. I think it's understandable for people to give up in the political realm because things have been so disheartening, and in many cases our voices have been drowned out by corporate interests. But I think we have to keep trying. I think, you know, we have seen so much horrible policy coming down the pipes, especially during the Trump administration, but it's still coming. I mean, between these Supreme Court rulings like Sackett, which gutted Clean Water Act protection from most Arizona streams. I mean, that directly affects whether or not we can stop these mines in many cases. So that is like, it's right there. And of course, judges are appointed by politicians, by presidents. So it's, I mean, that specific example was like, those are decisions of people in the past that have appointed these justices that are still there, as well as ones of more recent times. I guess just the other little thing I'll say is like, I think individual action is important. I think the decisions that we make as individuals and how they impact the environment are important, but I don't think they're anywhere near as important as affecting systems change. And I don't think that individual decisions are as responsible for the world that we're seeing now as are the corporate interests that are ravaging our world for profit.
Can I do one follow-up on that? Thank you. I actually woke up this morning thinking about the ephemeral waters decision that the Supreme Court made, and wondering whether a state or entities in the state like Arizona, where those ephemeral waters are a really much more significant part of our water picture than in other regions of the country, are there people arguing for an overturning of that particular aspect of that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to speak for Arizona at large, but I mean, our communities are certainly in uproar. You know, it's a Supreme Court decision that that's the end of the line, which is devastating. But any remedy to that is going to have to take place legislatively. Like, we're going to have to pass a new law that affirms that these ephemeral waterways deserve protection under the Clean Water Act, and that's possible. I mean, I do think legislators in Arizona and elsewhere are working on some sort of a solution like that. But yeah, it's a long road ahead just to restore what was one ill thought out bad decision by the Supreme Court, and we're gonna have a lot more of those.
Moeddin, you had your hand up before?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to, there was a question about whether there are any numbers about biodiversity. I put in the chat just one figures from the Nature Conservancy that there are 3,500 species of plants, 500 species of birds, and 1,000 or so. So these are the some of the figures about the what Laiken was talking about.